Imagine coming home after a week in the middle of nowhere, just you and the silence of the woods, only to find that the place you call home has been turned into a pile of splinters and broken glass. I didn't even have the energy to scream. I just stood there on the edge of my gravel driveway with the smell of damp drywall and crushed pine filling my lungs, watching the dust settle over what used to be a $3 million view of Blackwood Lake. I just sat down on the tailgate of my Silverado, popped a lukewarm soda, and waited because I knew the local in quote, Queen Bee in quote, Wooden and Oppos, to be able to resist coming by to admire her handiwork. Her name was Beverly Vance, the kind of woman who wore pearls to a construction site and treated the neighborhood HOA like her own private fiefdom, and before I could even finish my drink, there she was strutting across my ruined lawn with a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon of war. She had this look on her face, a mix of sheer arrogance and that fake, sugary concern that makes your skin crawl, and she didn't in Oppos, to even wait for me to speak before she started reciting bylaws like they were holy scripture. End quote. Jackson, we try to warn you, end quote, she said, tapping her pen against the paper with a rhythmic click that made my jaw tighten, end quote. You've been delinquent on your maintenance assessments and architectural fines for 6 months. And under Article 4, Section 7 of the Blackwood Cove Covenants, the association has the right to abate any nuisance that threatens the property values of the collective, end quote. I just looked at her, then looked at the crater where my master bedroom used to be, and I felt this strange, cold calm wash over me because she had no idea the kind of fire she just started. End quote. A nuisance, Bev? You bulldozed a custom-built home because of some late fees and a lawn that was 3 inches too high. End quote. I asked, my voice coming out low and steady, but she just gave me this dismissive little wave and told me the board had voted unanimously to, end quote, reclaim the aesthetic integrity, end quote, of the lot. She actually had the nerve to tell me I should be grateful they were doing the cleanup for me. And as she turned to walk away, I realized she really believed she was untouchable, that her little title as HOA president gave her the power of a god in this zip code. What Beverly didn't into Oppos, Tino, what none of them knew because they were too busy counting the flowers in people's gardens, was that 3 years ago, when the original developer went bankrupt, I didn't just buy a house in Blackwood Cove, I bought the entire underlying debt of the development. I held the master deed to every single square inch of land these people were living on, including the very dirt under Beverly's designer heels. And the only reason I let the HOA keep playing dress-up was because I liked having someone else manage the trash pickup and the pool cleaning. But standing there looking at the ruins of my life, the end quote, convenience end quote, of the HOA had officially expired. So I reached in my glove box, pulled out a heavy manila folder that I kept for a rainy day, and called her back. End quote. You might want to take a closer look at that clipboard of yours, Beverly, specifically the part where it says who actually owns the rights to the common areas and the residential parcels, end quote, I said, tossing a notarized copy of the master land grant onto the hood of my truck. Her face went from smug to confused, then to a ghostly shade of white as she scanned the documents, her eyes darting back and forth while she realized that her, end quote, authority, end quote, was built on a foundation of sand. I told her right then and there that she hadn't just destroyed a house. She'd committed felony criminal mischief on land that she had no legal right to step foot on, and that by the time the sun went down, I wooed in Oppos. T'd just be suing her. I'd be coming for everything she owned. She tried to stammer out something about, end quote, board immunity, end quote, and, end quote, collective interest, end quote, but her voice was shaking so hard she could barely get the words out, so I just pointed toward the exit of my property and told her to get her lawyer on the phone. The next few days were a blur of sirens and suits, starting with a visit from the county sheriff, a guy named Miller who'd known me for years and Kuden and Oppos. He believed the level of insanity he was looking at. Well, I showed him the security footage from my hidden trail cams, clear shots of Beverly standing there pointing a finger like a general while a no-name demolition crew tore in my walls. His face went red, and he just shook his head and said, end quote, Jackson, I've seen some HOA power trips in my time, but this is a whole new level of crazy, end quote. We found out pretty quickly that Beverly had an Oppos. T gone through the courts, she had an Oppos. T filed a lien, and she certainly had an Oppos. T gotten a demolition permit. Instead, she'd hired a, end quote, fly-by-night, end quote. Crew from 2 counties over paid them in cash out of the HOA's emergency reserve fund and told them the house was a condemned drug den. It was a calculated, malicious strike designed to run me out of the neighborhood because I was the only one who ever stood up to her at the meetings. But her little plan had one massive flaw. She'd used community money to commit a crime. That opened the door for a forensic audit, and that's when the real rot started to show, because it turns out Beverly had been treating the HOA bank account like her own personal ATM for years, labeling thousands of dollars in spa days and luxury travel as, end quote, landscaping consultations, end quote, and, end quote, administrative overhead, end quote. While the police were busy digging through her bank records, I was busy with my attorney, a shark of a woman named Elena, who lived for cases like this, and we didn't in oppos. T just filed a lawsuit. We went for a total, end quote, scorched earth, end quote, policy. We filed for an immediate injunction to freeze the HOA and oppos' assets, effectively paralyzing the board, and then I sent out a certified letter to every single resident in Blackwood Cove informing them that their HOA was being dissolved by the master landholder for breach of contract and criminal negligence. You should have seen the neighborhood forum that night. It was like a hive of hornets had been kicked, with half the people terrified they were going to lose their homes and the other half realizing they'd been paying dues to a criminal organization. The climax of the whole mess happened at an emergency town hall in the community center, a room packed with people I'd known for years, all of them whispering and staring at the empty seats where the board used to sit. Beverly showed up with a lawyer who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth, and she tried one last time to play the victim, crying about how she only wanted, end quote, the best for the community, end quote. But then Elena stood up, opened a laptop, and projected the bank statements on the big screen for everyone to see. The cash withdrawals, the shady payments to the demolition crew, and the emails where Beverly joked about, end quote, leveling the eyesore, end quote, on my lot. The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating kind of silence, until one of the older residents, a retired teacher who'd been fined by Beverly for having a bird feeder, stood up and asked the only question that mattered, end quote. Where did our money go, Beverly? End quote. Beverly didn't end oppos. T have an answer. She just sat there clutching her pearls while the sheriff stepped into the back of the room with a pair of handcuffs. And that was the moment the, end quote, Queen of Blackwood Cove, end quote, finally fell. She was let out in front of all the neighbors she'd bullied for years, charged with embezzlement, conspiracy, and felony destruction of property. And as the cruiser pulled away, I felt a weight lift off the entire neighborhood. The trial was short and brutal. The evidence was just too overwhelming, and Beverly ended up sentenced to 4 years in a state facility, with the rest of her board members being hit with massive fines and permanent bans from ever serving in a community leadership role again. But the most satisfying part was, and oppos, T the jail time or the legal victory. It was what happened to the land itself, because once the HOA was officially dissolved and the receiver finished the audit, there was no more board to dictate what color you could paint your front door or how many guests you could have over for a barbecue. I decided not to rebuild the mansion, at least not right away. Instead, I used the settlement money from Beverly's personal assets and the HOA's insurance to turn my lot into a massive, open-access park for the whole neighborhood, a place where people could actually enjoy the lake without worrying about a clipboard-carrying tyrant hiding in the bushes. Now, when I walk down to the water, I see kids playing on the grass and neighbors actually talking to each other again, and the only, end quote, rules, end quote, we have are common sense and being a good person. It took losing my house to realize that a community ISN and oppos, T built out of bylaws and architectural standards, it's built out of trust, and sometimes you have to tear down the old, rotten structures, both the physical ones and the legal ones, to make room for something that actually has a soul. Looking back on it, that pile of rubble was the best thing that ever happened to Blackwood Cove, and even though I'm still living in a small lakeside cabin while I figure out my next move, I've never felt more at home. It makes you wonder, though, how many other, end quote, Beverly's, end quote, are out there right now, measuring grass and counting flowers while they wait for their chance to play God with someone else's life? We all like to think our homes are our castles, but if you live in an HOA, you're really just a tenant in someone else's ego trip. And I'm curious, have any of you ever had to deal with a board president who thought they were above the law, or a neighbor who took, end quote, neighborhood watch, end quote, a little too literally? Is the safety and, in quote, aesthetic, in quote, of an HOA worth the risk of losing your rights? Or is it time we started taking our neighborhoods back, one lot at a time? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Because trust me, you don't want to wait until there's a bulldozer in your driveway to find out who really owns the dirt you're standing on.